Can we have 5-10 minutes? Even if that's not long enough, we'll carry on. Of any questions that anybody wants to put to Nicholas, Daniela, or Margaret specifically about teaching jobs, getting a teaching job, pay conditions, anything that might be on your mind?
Oh, sorry, I should have mentioned the job in Indonesia said they paid $700 US a month. It's actually more like 600. The identical job in Vietnam pays 1,400. So again, don't sell yourself short.
Brandon, you can prepare it.
I was just right. Sorry. I think it was Nicholas. You mentioned about kind of don't bother applying in January because nobody's looking. When would you say is kind of like that golden period to apply?
For schools in the UK?
In the UK, yeah.
So we're going to start our employment drive probably the end of, no later than the end of February, looking ahead for summer, but they'll be for temporary summer roles. That's sometimes a good way to get your foot in the door. You join a school, you do a really good job, and if there's opportunities after the summer, schools will want to retain good teachers. In reality, because of continuous enrolment, there is a small possibility that at any point in the year, school's going to need a teacher, but it's probably going to be 0 hours or part time or just pity. But yeah, I'd say sort of spring.
Do you need a specific English language teaching qualification to do these sorts of jobs, or are you the fact that you're on a course getting a qualification, is that good enough, or having a PGCE? How do they all fit in?
Okay, so for British Council, teachers have to be TEFL I, which is a CELTA or Trinity TESOL. As I said before, my senior teacher, who actually has quite a lot of responsibility in the school, she doesn't have a CELTA, but she completed her Masters, and we looked at the breakdown of her Masters, and specifically it's how many supervised hours you have practice teaching on your course, and whether you have a supervisor to get your feedback. So there might possibly be some leeway there, but most British Council schools need the CELTA already.
I would just add to that if you're planning to start applying for jobs before you graduate, put something in your CV about how you're planning to balance working and finishing your Masters, because I get a lot of, we run a foundation program for university students, and I get a lot of teachers, because these have to be TEFL Q, and I get a lot of applications from teachers who say, oh, well, I'm currently doing my Masters, and I throw all of those in the bin, because I need to know, I can't hire you until you graduate. You don't tell me, okay, well, I'm applying now for next year because that's when I will have finished my Masters course, because until you complete it, until you graduate, you're still TEFL I, which means you're not qualified for the job. So if you're applying for something now before your graduation date, if it's a part-time role, say, okay, well, I can only work these times because I need to finish my Masters course, and be very clear about that in the CV, because otherwise, what I might read that as the person reading your CV is, I'm currently failing this Masters course and I'm trying to save myself in the meantime, or I'm not planning on finishing it. So that's just something I would add in there as well.
About the British Council requirement, I know obviously it's TEFL Q, not TEFL Q, right?
TEFL I is
CELTA one. So I know there's some school they want an undergrad as well, bachelor. Some other student, like someone is finishing completing their degree, someone as long as they have the CELTA and relative experience. Where does the British Council stand on that? Because they obviously are accredited from British Council.
Oh, yeah, you need an undergrad degree as well.
Well, we have a teacher that doesn't have an undergrad. He he didn't complete a bachelor's before doing his CELTA, and we have to write a specific report for him in, I guess, a similar way you'll have to do for Nicola. When we have British Council inspections, I have to write a report defending why I have chosen to hire this teacher, despite the fact he has about 8 years of teaching experience. So that's something that could be a consideration, is that your manager's going to look at it and be like, are they worth writing this report for every single time the British Council comes in? So that's something as well to think about. It's not a barrier to it.
Because
but,
it happened that I've applied for a school and they received, but a few schools they say you can't because it's never undergrad. But I'm currently working for a school.
once you get the
and they are-
masters, no one will care.
Yeah.
I'm still an undergrad. I'm still an
Oh, are you
undergrad.
still in
Yeah, I'm
the
still an undergrad.
When you finished it,
No,
then
but I'm currently working. They are affiliated for British Council, so we're just trying to understand where did the British Council
Oh,
stand.
you're currently
I
working
am
for a British
working-
Council accredited school
Exactly,
without a first degree.
without having a degree. But then other schools before told me, no, we can't take you because you didn't have.
Right.
So I
this
was
school
trying
seems to was worth writing the report for,
Okay.
and the other ones have missed out on you, basically.
No, that was okay. Thank you. I wasn't looking for a compliment. I wasn't fishing for that.
No, but this is the British Council is very, very clear that you have to have, all your staff have to have TEFL I and a level 6, which is bachelor's. So yeah.
So the school, if they have an inspection, they have to write a rationale for why they've employed you and why you can do the job, which is actually not that hard to do really.
Yeah.
But it's just maybe a bit of
Just
work
extra
on the
hassle.
part.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Margaret, I know that I spoke to you earlier on, but if you're actually looking for a job abroad and you do have a partner, spouse, whatever, are these schools likely to help you find employment for family
No.
members?
No, definitely not. You would need to research yourself the possibilities for your partner working in that country. Schools are, the whole recruitment plan is predicated on mainly bringing up young, recently qualified teachers to do a couple of years in Southeast Asia, and then those people would move on. So if you fall outside of those parameters, you need to engage in a lot more discussion with the school about whether you're the right kind of person for them. And some schools, they would help, but the majority would not.
Yeah, I've been looking online for English language teaching opportunities. There's a lot of them that are saying I need my 40-hour TEFL. I've got the CELTA. Is that, I don't know how much credit the 40-hour TEFL carries. Is the CELTA about that level or is it higher? So if I went to them and said I don't have the 40-hour TEFL but I do have my CELTA.
Depending on what the 40-hour TEFL is, your CELTA should be a lot better.
Okay.
Anything, any CBRC with TEFL written on it, I
Mm.
throw in the bin
Okay.
Yeah.
because it's not relevant.
Okay.
If it's not a CELTA or a Trinity TESOL, I don't consider it.
Okay. That's good.
That's an interesting point, because especially overseas you see an awful lot of them.
Yeah.
Like there's a company called I2I,
Yeah.
Oh yes.
and they do a 40 hours a week.
Okay.
The CELTA is 4 weeks, literally 120 hours, so to 160. But a lot of those 40 hours, they just give you a taster of what teaching English is. There are a lot of schools that will take you because, I think availability is the number one characteristic. That's not a lie. I had a horrible reputation in Hanoi when I met any people in a bar and got talking, and they'd say, "Oh, I've just been talking to Margaret. It's really interesting what you do." My staff would laugh and say, "You'll be getting a phone call on Monday," because they knew I always needed teachers. Companies are expanding more quickly than you can imagine, so you will be offered jobs all the time. It's your responsibility to sort out which are good jobs and which are
It's
not.
whether they're any good or not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've got two questions. First one is, with experience, if you're looking for experience, what's your definition of experience? So would you include voluntary work? If know, if someone's done some volunteer teaching, would you include that? And would you include teaching done outside of ELT, so teaching in mainstream education? What's your feeling on experience? And the other one was, you mentioned, Nicholas, you mentioned personality, so you're looking for a certain type of personality in an interview. How could our students demonstrate the type of personality? You know, what could they tell you, or how could they interact with you to demonstrate the type of person that makes you think, yes, this person's really going to fit in and be worth hiring? So first question about experience, and the second one about personality.
We were just talking about this on the train here.
Okay, so experience, and actually something I forgot to mention before was relevant experience is not always just teaching experience. Like, for instance, experience with young learners, even if that's not in a classroom environment, that's still relevant if you're applying for a school that has young learners to a certain degree. Same with business, you know, if you have some corporate experience, you know, that's transferable, so things like that are important. It's important to talk about that or highlight that. Normally when I talk about an experienced teacher, we look for 2 years full-time, more or less, teaching classroom experience. That's sort of what we are hoping for. And you know, that we really need to be able to see that on your CV. Like, okay, you did your CELTA in 2010, but like looking at your work experience, have you actually been full-time since then, or has it just been a month here, a month there? And if you have changed so many times in such a short space, why didn't you stick with one school? So that kind of rings alarm bells. As for personality, well, I mean, every school's looking for a different personality and different characteristics. I can't speak for every school. I think that whoever's interviewing you will know sort of what will fit in the team that exists already. I suppose you have to convey who you are, and you know, you have to not be afraid to you know, share some of your personality in the interview. Quite often, I've been interviewed and people have asked me about, you know, my hobbies, my free time, you know, my life in general, you know, so they're kind of looking for things there as well. So I would encourage people to yeah, as much as possible, present themselves professionally in their experience, but also, you know, present themselves as a person that's going to be joining the team. I don't know if you've got any other.
Can I ask Margaret to answer, because you're hiring locally, Margaret? In terms of the personality thing in particular, what sort of people demonstrate, either through what they say or how they interact with you?
That's a really interesting question, because when it's remote through an application, it's quite difficult to gauge. What I'm looking for would be people who the students would like, who would fit in with the team, who would be easy to work for, who easy to work with. And you pick up clues really by the way they describe what they've been doing. You describe what they're interested in. And I mean, a CV isn't a chatty document, so you're reading between the lines to an extent. If your CV is well enough presented, you'll get a phone call, and in the phone call, really, it's how easy it is to communicate with that person. That's when the personality really comes in, I suppose.
I would just like to make a point on the volunteer teaching, because one thing that we do a lot of at the college is training for volunteer teachers, for refugee teachers. It can be a benefit. However, the expectations and the actual quality of teaching for volunteer the expectations are like dirt level. There is very little you know, the charity is just so desperate to get people in to help these very vulnerable learners, but they actually don't really care whether or not you're actually teaching them well. So if you are going to do that kind of thing, make sure that you are teaching effectively and then communicate that in your CV. So talk about the kinds of activities that you do, lot of the volunteers that I train just buzz through worksheets and get through like 10 or 12 in like a 40-minute lesson and don't see the issue with that in terms of actually getting the information into students' heads. So as long as it's not a negative, but just make sure that you're volunteer teaching in a principled way and communicate that.
Quick one. You know when you mentioned about a lot of professional English language teaching jobs look for kind of 2 years prior experience after having the CELTA usually, how would you go about getting those jobs without having those 2 years, say fresh out of university? What would you be looking for to get those jobs, which would give you that experience?
Okay, how do you get the job without the experience?
Without
already?
How
do you get your first job?
Yes.
Well, as my teacher said, look for a desperate school. Look for a school that really needs a teacher immediately. That does sometimes happen. My first, I'd already trained as a secondary school teacher, but my first EFL job is the place where I did my CELTA. I did the CELTA, got chatting to the DOS, and he said to me maybe 2 days before I'd finished the CELTA, he said, "Oh, our sales team have just said yes to a group of Chinese teenagers who are coming next week on Monday. Would you like to teach them, please?" And I just said, "Yeah, okay, fine." And then I worked there for 2 years. So being a yes man, saying yes to things, like be willing to do something that perhaps you're not so confident with, be prepared to step out of your security blanket. A lot of my colleagues used to say to me, get your first job in Far East Asia. I'm not actually sure if that's fair to say because I've actually never worked out there, but do you think Asian schools are more willing to accept?
Just that the volume of people wanting English lessons is so high in Southeast Asia. That's why there's so many jobs available. That's probably also true in parts of Latin America. You won't get a job in India because there are lots and lots of English native speakers teaching for a fraction of what they pay a Westerner. So forget somewhere like India, it won't happen. If you look on job boards, you will see literally hundreds and hundreds in China. And it'll be a very interesting deep end experience for you. Do your research before you apply. Universities are a questionable benefit. In some countries, a job in a university is prestigious. Singapore, for example. You have to be good and you have to have experience and you'll have a very good job. A university in Vietnam, less so. The private sector will pay 2 to 3 times as much. The job will be much better resourced and funded. In a university, you're quite likely to be teaching in rooms without aircon, without windows, where your students sit at long wooden benches. You won't find that in the private sector. The same goes for China. So you have to put quite a lot of work in looking at places you're going to teach in. I mean, you can just rock up in a country and knock on a door and you'll get a job for the Monday. You might find yourself having to teach 45 hours a week to make ends meet. And it's not going to look good on your CV for your next stage. So putting the work in before you go, in terms of your research, will really pay off in the long run.
Okay, thank you. If there are any other questions, I'm sure that Margaret, Nick and Daniela are contactable. Maybe you could put some of the information, send them to, is it Andrew? Got your contact? The PowerPoints so we can put them on our Moodle board, Moodle, somewhere. Is that okay? Yeah. So thank you very much to you three. I don't know whether the coffee is still there, but I propose we have a quick comfort break for anybody that wants it. If you want to grab a coffee, do so. Dr. Hepworth is sitting at the back, raring to go. Yeah. I was pretty pleased to see you walk in.